The catalyst was Maximum Rock and Roll magazine. "You're quitting the band?" my best friend Bill screeched in my direction. No, I'm not quitting. It's just that... Just what? "Well, the other band actually has some gigs, and I'd like to play some gigs." I had to own my decision. I had outgrown my first ever own my decision that I had outgrown my first ever band, formed during my years at Fortuna Union High, just south of Humboldt Bay. I had brought into the whole notion that all I needed to do was master hammering out the 4/4 beat with an over-the-top trap kit with manic precision and timely shrieks from the gaping mob hell, all combined with similar antics with the right group of fellows, and subsequently a lifestyle of drug, sex, and, well, popularity would be all ours. The source which fueled the majority of this fantasy were always the latest issues of Hit Parader and Circus magazines, which I read voraciously, dreaming that the lifestyle romanticized in these pages would be our ticket out of a dead-end country living. When I was unable to get enough of those mags, I moved on to Kerrang! From the UK and a spin-off publication of Cream called Metal Edge. The magazines gave us access to a supposedly real world where hormone-driven teenage boys could revel in a kingdom of slickly crunched-out power chords, big hair, dime store Satanism, and outrageous behavior that was the antidote to my parents' world of the Eagles, Fleetwood Mac, or even my friends' parents' worlds of Lee Greenwood or Charlie Daniels. The bass player, my other longtime friend Brian, calmly took a bong rip and declared, "They're only letting you in because you have a truck and you can drive all their gear around to different places." Then he exhaled. I had to own this too. High school graduation had come and gone. I was supposed to be serious about college, but my band had been on me to devote more time to them, but all my band devoted time to was scoring and doing drugs before any kind of rehearsal, and the deranged practices, much less non-gigs, we had were not leading to any kind of groupies. Now, while these magazines never talked about drugs, it was widely assumed that they were present along with all the loose women and vast amounts of alcohol that were lavishly fetishized. Nowhere did it occur to me that this apparent counterculture was as much a device for promoting Reagan-style consumerism as any given episode of Different Strokes. Nowhere did it occur to me that there had once been a thing called glam rock, and that the LA metal scene of the 80s was just the corporate co-opting of that previous scene's riffs and look into a more streamlined and easily swallowed package. At no time did it occur to me that all the gay bashing and homophobia that went along with LA metal was at absurd odds with the leather chaps and studded gloves worn by Vince Neil of Motley Crue, Blackie Lawless of Wasp, or Early Armored Saint. And of course, nowhere was it mentioned that Rob Halford of Judas Priest and Udo Dirkschneider of Accept weren't kidding at all. No, they were just serious bikers, and perhaps even under all that rock and roll, serious Satanists. And here we were, thank you. And here we were, armed with 3 chords and a hetero porn fantasy we didn't realize had been manufactured for us by the record companies, corporate and indie both. On some level, I wanted to believe it was Beelzebub, but it was somewhere in late 1985, during the corporate flogging of one-shot knockoff albums by such memorable bands as Keel and Rough Cut, that there came a feeling that something was rotten in the Dark Lord's pleasure palace. I had been into the scene for a couple of years, and I finally laid into some drum beats, but really the party hadn't shown up, and I was beginning to wonder where it was. The nearest place to have any kind of a chance to play regularly was the San Francisco Bay Area, and when I mentioned this to my landscaping boss, that I thought my band needed to set up some gigs in the land of YNT and Night Ranger, he tossed me a magazine that he had come across the day before and said, "Oh, you sound like you want to hang out with these guys." My boss, being of my parents' generation, did not know the difference between metal and punk. The name of the magazine was Maximum Rock and Roll, and what it represented blew my brain wide open. This zine of zines, thicker than any I had ever seen, contained nothing less than dispatches from a revolution that was too stubborn to quit. The magazine wasn't slick or glossy. It came in that pulpy stock newsprint classified ad papers came in. The images on the cover weren't of dragons or ring race, but some freak looking like he had been rejected from a Devo audition. His name was Eugene Chadbourne, and his instrument of choice was a yard rake outfitted with an electric guitar pickup. Maximum Rock and Roll, also known as MRR, is where I learned what the difference between a vegan and a vegetarian was, and that there were hardcore punk bands whose entire song catalogs existed only to advance the cause and awareness of vegans, and this was called vegan punk. There was a band of hardcore homosexuals called Pansy Division, and thus there was queer punk, but also girl punk, straight edge, socialist punk, commie punk, anarchist punk, doper punk, ethno-punk, both racist and anti-racist skinhead punk, and every combination of all these things was not only allowed if possible, it was encouraged even if impossible. There were bands with names like Peasants with Pitchforks, the Stiff Richards, Heavy Mental, the Slags, the Muffs, the True Sounds of Liberty, Minor Threat, and Corrosion of Conformity. Bands like the Dead Kennedys, Flipper, Metallica, DRI, and Suicidal Tendencies were considered already to be graduated from the underground, if not outright sellouts by a vocal minority. But that was celebrated too. Anyone could have an opinion, and everyone did have an opinion, and if it was halfway intelligible, it had a great chance of being published in the pages of Maximum Rock and Roll. Reporters or bureaus existed all throughout the world. Underground reports coming in each issue from all over, from Asia, China, South and Central America, Eastern Europe, still under Soviet control at that time, Northern Africa, Scandinavia, and Canada. The rhetoric found in the articles and columns of Maximum Rock and Roll informed me that because I lacked money and mountains of cocaine, a buffet of scantily clad groupies would never be part of my reality. The remarkable thing, though, was that this was not depressing to me anymore. Now that I realized an entire demographic that fit my description had been conned, it was now more exhilarating to be reading the truth expressed by someone who didn't set themselves up as an authority figure. And the truth was that the promise of rock and roll in the 1980s had become a delusional fantasy that was a proven vehicle for separating the alienated, acne-faced members of this demographic from their money. But Maximum Rock and Roll offered an alternative model as well. A promise not of wretched excess, but tolerance of differing opinions, tolerance of moderation and/or abstinence, and perhaps most important of all, tolerance for diverse identities. In this world, girls didn't wait backstage for cheap sex handouts from macho rocker dudes, but they took up the instruments and stormed the main stage for themselves, and truth be told, in the punk world, there weren't that many backstages. Anything went, and anyone could pick up an instrument and take a democratic shot on the stages these do-it-yourself rockers were establishing around the world. So yes, I quit my run-of-the-mill wannabe Motley Crue band, and I joined a band called Social Outrage, a much more accomplished death metal band. And yes, the degree of difference between Motley Crue and death metal was epic. It made me a better drummer for playing with better musicians more often, and got me those gigs in the Bay Area, memorably at a lovely shithole of a joint called Rosie's, opening for Death Angel in mid-1986. Alas, my survival instinct revealed to me that a life of sleeping on the floors of meth addicts across Northern California was not in the cards for me, even though many bad habits developed on that one brief tour that would hang with me through much of the rest of my life. There would even be a couple of other bands, but so also would a life as a comedy troupe writer, an actor, an activist, a union organizer, and a poet. And yet all of these things, all of these possible avenues of creative freedom and expression floated over my life like a state of grace because Maximum Rock and Roll opened the curtain and allowed me to see it. In fact, it floated over many lives of Generation X. The printed rantings of the underground, turning these kids onto the sounds and words of thinking for themselves, turning them onto the possibility that they could, if only for a little while, seize their own destiny before the monopolistic door slammed in their faces with those first few whiffs of teen spirit on MTV.
Music is a type of magic. You never quite know what you're going to get when you channel it. When I was a teenager, I sat in my room, door locked, blankets over the window, blocking out any outside sounds and light I could. A group of my former friends waited outside my house to beat me up if I so much as stepped out of the house. They enlisted their friends and siblings to call and harass or take me down should I so much as walk past them with the wrong look on my face. I become subject to bullying through nothing dramatic on my part, merely the whims of the crowd I'd hung with. One day they liked me, the next, after having a party without me and talking behind my back, they didn't. These were kids I'd been friends with since elementary school, throwing rocks at my windows, punching me in the face with no warning, and pulling my hair. When before we'd sat together playing piano, listening to mixtapes. I fought back when I had to, but mostly I picked up my guitar instead. I played songs hoping to catapult myself into a future world where I wouldn't have to worry about getting 2 black eyes and a bloody nose when I stepped outside my house. Music was my only hope. As I grew older, I became more specific about what I wanted. In the beginning, connections with others like me seemed sufficient. Others who listened to the same music, gritty grunge, British punk, heavy metal. As long as it had heavy drums and bass, lyrics speaking to social ostracism and being pinned in by unrealistic societal standards, I was on it. I wanted to channel the music like Ozzy and Cobain and the Sex Pistols, had an envy for the way what they'd put out there had ended up blasting on my boombox speakers, soothing me into the belief that I wasn't alone in the world. Connection is a mutual choice, not a one-sided deal. Over the years, I kept creating my own music, aiming it subliminally over suburban barriers, city walls, to souls all over the world. Music connected my peers and I when I hitchhiked across the country to get the fuck out of Dodge after the bullying started. We met each other in different states, in different parking lots for different shows. Sometimes I used the music only for the peripherals. Company, beer, food, travel, switching out genres to fine-tune my companions, trading classical rock and hippie music for grunge, trading in grunge for black metal, industrial, and punk. These days, I don't like to put my musical styles in a box. One person's genre is another person's migraine. Some people won't even talk to others who don't listen to the same music as them. That's not what I'm endorsing. Common music can connect people from different strata just as well as people from similar strata. Music as an art form for attraction is these days channeled through whatever means necessary, through Bandcamp, SoundCloud, or in the beginning, in my case, the cassette tapes I handed out to every musician I met hoping to start a band. The first time I ever jammed with a bass player and drummer together was heaven, something that almost brought tears to my eyes. We sounded like a female version of Alice in Chains. We never jammed again. The bass player and drummer, both men, got in a fight over me and refused to be in the same room ever after. I won't get into a diatribe about being a female musician. That's a whole nother topic. Then there's my bass player. Without the Craigslist ad I posted in desperation trying to find a bass player and drummer to work on tunes I'd written by myself as a singer and guitarist, I never would have met him. The night he walked into the practice space where I was also meeting the drummer for the first time, I looked from his boots to shaggy brown hair, rope clean arms, dark brown eyes meeting mine, and thought, I can jam with these guys. Turned out he was married, so I put him in the do not date box, which I further sealed with the lock is also in my band, so truly off limits. I jokingly called him Marin Boy for the first year we played music together. Meanwhile, he developed an epic crush on me I could only brush off, hoping it would die down. Over the next year, I slowly learned more about him as we hashed out the songs I haphazardly pieced together for the band to work on. That he was an old school punk, grew up in Hawaii. He told me he'd gone from Beatles to Black Sabbath to Black Flag growing up. Never were we chummier in practice than when I threw out rudimentary Peni songs I wanted us to cover. Gloomy British anarcho-punk bands seemed to be our common thread, though from present-day exterior we had few trappings in common. He was white-collar, office administrator at an architecture firm. I was a part-time library employee going on 3 years now out in the sticks, Oakland pride to the point of annoyance, ensconced in a small-town feeling artist mecca composed of cynical tattooed punks and hipsters. He didn't have a single tattoo on his flesh, not even a homemade one from teenage years, and lived in a cottage out in the woods of Marin with his wife of 16 years. I had so many tattoos I had stopped seeing them as individual tattoos, or even anything of significance, just foliage that adored my skin. Fuck trappings, he said to me after we started really talking, once he and his wife separated. They're such bullshit, I said. One day when I was sick with the stomach flu, he lay on my bed keeping me company, staring at the flyers from local shows I had taped to my walls with blue duct tape. This looks like my girlfriend's room when I was 17, he said. I laughed, as if you never changed, I said. Music is a black art at times. You get out what you put in, and if you pour yourself into a song in a dark mood, others in a similar dark mood may come out of the woodwork to commiserate with what you've sown. Yet music seems to have its own filter. The heart of the matter speaks out no matter what sloppy form you pour it into. At least that's been the case with what I've created. I may not even know what I'm saying when I put it out there. A song about rejection, falling in love only to have the person disappear on you, becomes your roommate's song of solidarity when her boyfriend takes off to another country and doesn't even take a phone. Sometimes, as a musician, someone in the same flat is the farthest you connect. Other times, you reach someone across the world that listens in their bedroom, nods their head, and says, yes.